Back for a second installment here of chatting with Kory Heath and myself, Dave Bender. And there's a topic that came up in our original conversation that we thought was worth discussing at a little bit deeper level, a little bit at length. And let me just set up the context. So we were talking about a particular example of a theist author named or philosopher, Plantinga, and in his book, Where the Conflict Really Lies, he's basically making a claim about sort of subtle hidden biases that scientists, particularly scientists who believe in evolution, might have that would constrain their ability to view new evidence and would constrain their acceptance or what they're able to explore and propose for origins, or explanations for human origins and origins of life in general, and that these constraints are not the same for theists. Does that sound about right,
yeah.
Kory? Is your recollection?
Yep.
Right. So particularly with theists who believe that there was a God who created the earth and everything, including of course life and humanity, that they're much freer to look for any or go where the evidence leads them, is sort of, I think, the phrase that was used. Whereas if you're a scientist, well, evolution's the only game in town, evolution by natural selection, and materialism, or naturalism, I guess I should say, at least methodological naturalism, then the claim is that scientists who go that way are constrained, and that they're not going to be able to follow the evidence where it leads. And so that struck me as being really off, wildly off.
Right.
And the reason is there's a sort of background assumption that I have about science, and I think is very general, or generally people have about science and scientists. That the idea is that at least in principle they're open to the falsification of any theory in principle. Literally everything is on the table to being contradicted and overthrown as new evidence comes to light. So what do you think about that? Is that
right.
a dream?
So I don't know. It's of course complex. I was maybe kind of playing the devil's advocate, or at least trying to. I mean, as a disclaimer, I think for both of us, well, I don't know what you would claim. I mean, I'm not entirely sure what Plantinga meant, right? So I'm just I'm guessing. I haven't even read that book. I've read some of him, and he always confuses me. Yeah, so one of the I was saying I was trying to think of things that he might have meant to from my perspective.
Right.
And so, for example, let's see which way to even start with here. Well, actually, so you mentioned methodological naturalism.
Right.
Do you have any pithy way of summing up in a couple of sentences what you think that entails?
Right. So I think for at least this context, it's best to use Plantinga's pithy sum up.
Okay.
Or summation.
Sure.
So he basically says it's just basically operating under the assumption that there's no God, that you don't call into. No explanation you give needs to involve any kind of God in the sense, and that's in the sense of the theist sense of God. So like a personal, all-powerful, separate from nature cause of everything.
Okay. So his take is that science is essentially committed to the belief that there is no God. Like the idea that there is no God is sort of built right into as a bias into science. Is that, you think that's what he's suggesting?
Right. I think he might suggest that in general, although I don't want to put those words into his mouth when I'm not remembering exactly.
Yeah, sure.
I think let's if we limit it just to the case of um, evolution. I think what he's really saying is, here's this dominant theory. There really isn't anything else that that comes close to the explanatory power of evolution, and so that by itself it constrains what scientists are willing to look at.
Right. But yeah, that's a little bit weird because, I mean, you can just say that that's what you've really just said is there's a ton of evidence in favor of the theory of evolution, and that's why scientists believe it, right? Like, and if more evidence came to... So that's the idealistic view of science, right?
Right.
That I think you would take. I think I take that, like, yeah, you know, we don't believe that there's some deity that's, you know, getting its fingers involved in evolution because we don't have any evidence in favor of that, and we've got an explanation that you know, like a non that doesn't require a being that seems to work, that really seems to work for a ton of it, right? Well, let's talk a little bit about miracles in general, right? Like, do you think that so this is a thing that he might be saying, is that I mean, do you think that it's part of the scientific method or the scientific view that fundamentally, like that miracles are not possible, or miracles are not allowed, or that, you know, like fundamentally our universe is law-based, you know, and that, like, on the deepest level, those whatever the regularities are really there, and they're going to continue, and like we can't scientifically talk about something that could come in from the outside and mess with that stuff.
Right. That's interesting.
Like, do you consider that to be part of science, or do you think that's just a thing that we kind of, on a day-to-day basis, we accept that, but we know, like, if evidence piled up that there was a thing that was interfering with our laws of physics, then we would conclude that, yeah, that's what was happening.
Right. Yeah. So this drives right to the heart of it, I think, because I think, in principle, absolutely everything should be on the table.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that there are things in science that are that should, you know, that would take more of a mountain of evidence to overthrow.
Yeah.
Conservation of energy and right. I mean, you can think of things that, like, seem so fundamental, right? That you'd be like, oh man, how could that ever? Right. So, but I want to say that it should just everything in principle should be on the table. So yeah, like that reality is law governed should be right there on the table with everything else. Yeah. If we got a bunch of evidence, things looked chaotic enough at the edges or whatever. There's weird ways. And that should be on the table. But I don't know if that's the general view. Like,
so that's part of the problem.
One of the questions, right?
That's part of the problem is, like, if so maybe that's a thing that Plantinga is saying. So that was kind of the take I was thinking, was that, like, because so I think you and I agree that that should be on the table. Like, it should be on the table. That, like, well, the way I would put it, I'm like a computer science-y, science fiction-y guy, right? So the way I would put it is, I totally think we could be living in a big computer simulation, right? Like, or something equivalent to that.
Sure, not literally a computer like we know,
Right. So miracles are totally acceptable in that context, right? You could totally have a thing that's outside of our universe, you know, flipping bits or doing whatever, you know, like, maybe now our universe might be more interconnected. I don't understand how our universe works. Like, in Conway's life universe, things are really unconnected. Like, it's really easy to go twiddle bits in that universe, and not affecting, it doesn't, there's not relativity and quantum physics in that world. Like bits are really disconnected from each other in a sense, right? And so I don't know as much about our world to know how feasible that is. Like if we were a simulation in a computer, how easy would it be to flip it? Like how easy would it be to interfere with the conservation of mass and energy from the outside?
Right. I mean, I don't know if the idea, even in our physics, I don't know if non-local causality is even a totally resolved thing. It may be.
Yeah, it feels like it's not a totally resolved thing.
Right, but even if it was, it's like, I don't think that distinction would be a big problem. I don't think that would shoot down the idea that things could come in and fiddle, right?
Yeah. So a big part of the question is there even a standard version of naturalism or the scientific method? Okay, so you and I agree on this, but do scientists in general agree on this? So it sounds like Plantinga is saying that in general scientists don't agree with us.
So
scientists are more apt to say no. Miracles don't happen. And that and so if that's what he was saying, then I was agreeing with him basically on that. Yeah.
Let's give him the benefit of the doubt, because we're not going to absent some access to some sort of a nicely done survey that collects all that data. We're not going to get that information. So let's just say, and I from things that people that I've spoken with, and particularly mathematicians, but also I think physicists, I think many of them just have this very, very deep, abiding belief in the fundamental rule-based or law-abiding nature of reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's just say that they do. Let's say that it's a very strong thing. Not everybody, but a large part of certain kinds of scientists buy into that.
Right.
And so then the question is, is there no conceivable evidence that could be brought to light that would change their minds? Because I think that you could say that most scientists truly buy into this deeply, but you could still have an out that says that if enough evidence came to bear, and you could even argue that it does create this bias, and I would even maybe concede that. In other words, I mean, I hate using this example because it's like the totally obvious one, but if my reading of history is right, I mean, when Einstein did his first major publications in 1905, I think it was, with his first results on the quantum nature of light, right?
Light,
I think there was a few experimental results that came back. So he suggested, hey, you could test it this way, you could test it this way, you could do this, and I think there was a few experimental results that came back in the negative. And it ended up being problems with the experiments.
Right.
But right after that happened, he could have gone, whoa, there's evidence that counters what I was saying. But he was just like, no, I'm right. I'm sure it'll all come out.
Yeah.
Right. So, all right. So let's say that that's how scientists are, and let's say that creates a bias that might even make them wrong in some ways. I'm actually okay with that, but I don't think that necessarily means that they wouldn't be able to be convinced by enough evidence. Number one, and I guess the thing about Plantinga's argument maybe that bothered me the most is he just kind of flew, it almost seemed flippant. It's like this, and of course theists aren't constrained that way at all.
Right.
And I see the constraints on theists to be far more severe.
Right. If we
go ahead.
If we stick to that narrow, again, we're hypothesizing about a bunch of things. But if we stick to that narrow view about, say, for instance, miracles or something like that, then he could be interpreted as just saying no, theists are totally free for instance, consider the possibility that some divine being mucked around with evolution, like that,
Right.
Whereas, scientists, whether you can say, okay, sure, in principle they could change their view if enough evidence came to light, but in practice they're pretty closed. In practice, they approach the world like saying, no, we've got to find a mechanistic solution here. We've got to find a non-agency solution to answer to these questions.
I would say non-supernatural agency, because there's all kinds of
yeah, true. Yeah,
aliens, intelligent aliens could have created.
Yep.
That's perfectly fine, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess what I'm wondering is, so if we concede that there is, like, so a lot of people feel this very deep, they very deeply suspect that there isn't a thing that's mucking around with our physics, and that these regularities are really there,
Right.
Like, is there, and that, yeah, sure, maybe some evidence, really, some evidence could change people's minds. But my question is, like, colloquially, are people allowed to call this a religion that scientists have? Like, right, this is what I think. This is what I think people, religious people do this sometimes.
Right.
They say, well, this is a religious belief. Now it's a leap of faith that maybe that's part of the mistake, right? It's like, they're calling it a leap of faith, but actually it's just a belief based on tons and tons of evidence that that the regularities really are there, and it
But that's interesting to me, because I think that, so we're getting into a bunch of very complicated things. So
yep.
I think that evidence, this is another thing that people like to pretend, or like to say, speak as though evidence, any particular piece of evidence is inevitable, or that evidence for something, is that it's a simple thing, whether something can be counted as evidence for something or not. I think it's very complicated. The weighing and judging of evidence. So, I would say that I'm not so sure. Okay, so I'll put a stake in the ground. I'm not so sure how much I'll defend this, but I think that to the degree that a scientist would hold some view, let's say, for example, something like that the universe is fundamentally ruled, law governed. In the face of contrary evidence, or maybe even not that far, maybe even if someone was to say, yeah, I don't care what the evidence came back, I can't conceive of it being any differently, that I start to think actually does look like faith. It starts to look have some very interesting similarities with religious belief, and so this gets to where. Go ahead.
My question there is, does it even matter? Like, what? So go on with what you were going to say, but maybe it doesn't matter that much whether we call that a religion or not.
Right, and so here's where I think it does matter to me, although maybe I'm making too much out of it. I go, no, like, that's the difference. That's, like, to me, the hallmark of science, like the thing that separates as a way of understanding the world from all of the religious mumbo jumbo mythology that dominated us for thousands and thousands of years or more, right?
Yeah.
Is this idea of, like, embracing uncertainty, being open to the potential falsification, maybe is the right word, or refutation of anything. I was actually listening to or reading an article. Do you know the physicist David Deutsch? I don't know if that's the right way to pronounce it. But
I don't know how to pronounce it either, but I know.
Yeah, he's like a somewhat interesting guy. But I happened to have stumbled across an article where he was basically saying this exact same thing. Like this is the most important thing. Actually, he was saying, like, this is the most important idea humanity has ever come up with. but
Right.
maybe not that. But it's certainly he's saying this is the most important thing that separates scientific thinking from anything else. And this is this idea of constantly striving to knock down the thing that we believe in. Constantly striving to falsify or put up evidence that would refute or knock down the theories that we have. And to me, if we're saying, oh well, I don't know, there are a lot of ways where these things that scientists are believing are very similar to religious belief, that actually is a big deal to me.
Yeah. Well, right. I don't know that it is really very I mean, like I definitely am not interested. I practically am not even interested in talking about the perspective that says like, oh, you're making a leap of faith every time you sit on that chair. Because, right. Like So to me, it's like if your credence value or whatever, is extremely high, like if you're only 99% certain about something, I don't think it's correct to call it a leap of faith, that last 1%, right?
Right.
Because the problem, to say, oh look, you have a religion too. It's that chairs are gonna this untested chair that you're sitting on is gonna hold its weight, But I've always just been like, well, no, if your God was as consistent as this chair, then I would totally believe in your God. Like I don't need 100% evidence for your God. I just need the same 99% evidence that I have for everything, all the other stuff around me that I do believe in,
Right.
So we agree on that. And maybe is that real? Maybe that's all we're talking about on that particular issue.
Right. I mean, I would have thought there's more.
Yeah. Right. Well, so let's let's regroup a little bit about the so Plantinga says, right. So maybe he's making the claim that scientists aren't free to consider, just miracles or like whatever divine explanations for evolution. So I think you and I agree that in theory, ideally, that's not true, right? Like the idealist, the ideal scientific method would say, yeah, if we gather enough evidence in favor of like some intelligence outside of our some agency outside of our universe interfering with evolution or helping evolution or something, that we would accept that as true.
Right.
So.
Well, and we've agreed further, I think, that if to the degree that scientists hold a view that they themselves would admit is totally unassailable, untouchable by any kind of an evidence.
Yep.
Or any set of evidence, that is starting to smell like religious.
Right. Right.
But that's a little far from what Plantinga is saying, though. That's why you wanted to bring it back. Okay, I get it.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I'm not totally sure what Plantinga is actually saying.
Right. And I mean, I guess I was taking it a little more broadly. You're right, because if he's really just talking about evolution, it's like, yes, if you have this really well worked out explanation, that's going to constrain what you're willing to at least immediately consider likely or plausible, versus if you have an extremely abstract, non-specific explanation, and you're still looking for much more details. Well, then, there's just a lot more you could speculate on.
Yeah.
And in that very weak sense, sure.
Right.
But there's not a lot of meat there. There's not. I mean,
right.
It's not saying a whole lot. So.
And it's also So so now I'm playing less the devil's advocate and more more critical of what he might be saying. I would say so he's talking about what people are free to believe, and or at least that's the way that quote sounded. And it's kind of a weird way of speaking, because from my idealistic scientific viewpoint, I say, well, no, I'm free to believe anything. It's all about why would you believe that? It's like, okay, so he's saying theists are more free to accept some alternate explanation, but yeah, my question, like, I totally accept the possibility of something from the outside of our universe meddling with it. The question is, how would I know that? Why would I know that, right? And so it's not to me, the question isn't as interesting like what I'm free to believe there. It's like what, you know, more like what would you have to, what evidence would you need to have to start concluding that, yeah, there's, you know, that, yeah, but I mean, and then that gets into actual evolution, like the actual, all the sorts of arguments and data and all that, you know.
Right.
That gets complex.
Right. Yeah, there's no reason to go there really. I mean, it was just an example, so I imagine it was, you know.
Well, okay. Did you have something more to say, or I was gonna divert us now?
No, I think I mean, I'd like to take it, if you're all right, a little bit more abstract into the sort of the falsifiability in general.
That's exactly where I was going.
Okay, go for it.
So like, right. So we still do have this interesting this overarching question of like, you know, does science make any leaps of faith in any problematic way?
Right.
And so we're sort of, I think we're both sort of saying, I don't think so. That's kind of where, like, that's why we accept the scientist, you know, the scientific approach to things.
I think that individual scientists do all the time, or at least I'm open to the fact that I did the
exactly.
But that fortunately we have this really cool setup where like everybody else teams up and tries to smash everybody down.
Exactly. Right. And old scientists die and new ones are born.
Right. And anytime anybody publishes something, everybody tries to tear it up. And
right. So that's all interesting. Let's talk a little bit more about falsifiability, to push on this concept a little bit more, because this is an area where I have been a little bit confused about what I think, you know, scientists, like real world scientists, might think about it versus what I think the idealistic scientific method viewpoint should be, or something, you know.
Okay.
So do you think? So like one of the classic version, you know, examples of an unfalsifiable, what I've heard people claim is an unfalsifiable theory is the old creationist, well, you know, I don't know who believes this, the old creationist idea that the devil created the fossil record, or some being actually laid down the fossils, This is part of why we're so confused about evolution, is that we've actually been fooled, right?
Light in mid-flight is another example.
What's that?
The young Earth creationists' example of, or their explanation for why we see, we see stars that are so far away that the light would have had to been created in mid-flight. In order for the Earth to only be a couple thousand years old.
It's ingenious. You gotta hand it to people. Right. So here's my thing. I'm a little bit uncomfortable. Say the fossil record thing. I'm a little bit uncomfortable with claiming that that's unfalsifiable. I'm especially uncomfortable with the old logical positivist view that tried to connect falsifiability with meaning. Actually tried to define, you know, say the actual meaning of a sentence is you know, determined by what you could observe that would falsify it, or something.
Right. So that's
So okay, so neither of us buy that, right? No, so we can ignore that. So the idea is certainly meaningful that some being created the fossil record or created the light in flight. So here's my point about this, is like, let's say it is true that some being created the fossil record, right? That means there's some perspective from which you could see that that was true. So like if you were standing right next to that being and watching that being laying down the fossil record, you would have a way of falsifying. I mean, it's a falsifiable proposition. You'd be like, yeah, I think the fossil record is being laid down by this being, and it's for all the normal evidence. You know, it's like me watching you do something and saying, well, I'm 99% sure Dave is doing this thing.
Right.
You know,
So
I might be hallucinating, or I might be a brain in a vat, all that stuff, right?
Right. No, I think the distinction is between, I think, that people normally make is between something that's conceivably falsifiable versus like sort of like practically, like.
Okay.
Right.
So, what? So how does that? So, I would say then that the being creating the fossil record is just practically unfalsifiable, right? Not conceivably unfalsifiable. I don't even know what. So what does conceivably unfalsifiable mean? What are examples of those beliefs?
Well, I guess. Like what's conceivably unfalsifiable? That's. I mean, yeah.
Because I feel like those turn out to be meaningless statements, like.
Like logically impossibilities or like logical impossibilities.
Like when the mystic says all is one, right?
Right.
It's like that might be. I might be willing to call that unfalsifiable, but now we're in the more like in the logical positivist meaning. Really, I just think the sentence isn't very meaningful.
Right. But I guess
Right.
I don't think that sense of falsifiability is important to the way science needs that term to be defined. So I think
you think the practical.
Absolutely. I think that falsifiability in science is all about. It's all about practicality. It's all about, okay, how do we go about like gauging? Because I mean, there's other examples that are maybe a little bit slightly less weird. Like here's an example. I think that you could account, like if you just kept creating more and more like funky epicycles and crazy exceptions and more complicated math, that you could still maintain the whatever the Earth-centered view of the solar system. Right. And so why do we prefer the sun-centered view? It's like it's more elegant, it's simpler, the math works out better, easier. I mean, I hope I'm not talking out my ass here. I think that's an example. And so it's not it's like not it's not that other thing was falsified. It's that it just didn't appeal as much. It doesn't make sense as much. It doesn't. When you conceive of things in this other way, it just works out much better, simpler, easier.
Yeah.
And I think that's good enough for science. So I guess my point is, what am I trying to say? My point was, I think you can come up with examples where falsifiability is not even like sort of not conceivable plausibility, but just sort of
practical.
Falsifiability, practical falsifiability isn't possible, isn't even desirable. So I would say that reduces this whole idea of falsifiability. It's not like a litmus test. It's not like this is exactly what separates science from non-science. It's just a really good thing.
Right. So that
it's helpful.
So some of what we're talking about is sort of like a social, almost political thing, because there certainly have been people, scientists, and again, like going back to logical positivism and other.
Right.
There certainly have been many scientists who have said that is the litmus test, right? I mean, I got the impression that Popper kind of felt that way, but I don't know. It's confusing.
Right. I mean, I think it's like take him too far, take him too hard.
Okay.
Like, I think in some of his writing, like I was reading a few quotes fairly recently, and it was like, I mean, he understood that this was not something that you could just apply some sort of a formula to and decide whether something is falsifiable or not. That it was like, it was a complex issue, that sometimes things aren't falsified independently of something else, and that there's
Okay.
there's not necessarily always a single thing that conclusively falsifies something, and that you might have to have people. It's like anything else. You get experts
Yeah.
together. Anything in science, you do your very best to sort of get a consensus. And I don't know how much of that is revisionist or not.
Yeah.
I
Like
you know.
like to go back to Plantinga's the original topic. It's hard because you don't. I feel like he might be reacting to just a bunch of individual people who go too far or what.
Right.
It's this big boiling pot of like not everybody thinks the same. Like everybody says makes loose not very well defined statements about things and all that. So
Right.
yeah.
And so yeah, if you've got people that just take this hard-nosed stance on falsifiability, right?
Right.
Anything that's not falsified, but maybe it's not meaningful, but you're not doing science, and
Yeah.
it's like, right. So it seems to me like there's a middle ground where you could say, yes, of course, it's not the ultimate, but
Right.
of the many things that are really good to strive for, and that seem to be, the batteries in the light of science, or whatever, the fire that really pushes it and really cranks it up. Falsifiability is a really important point, and
Right.
that's how I take like what people like Deutsch is saying. I don't know. Maybe they're pushing it much harder. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's this whole cloud of things. There's like the falsifiability issue. You brought up. You implicitly brought up Occam's razor. I don't remember if you actually said Occam's razor.
I didn't.
But that's sort of like in the epicycles thing, right? That's part of the feeling there. I think is that the simpler picture is the one to be preferred there. I think we're in a territory where I feel like religious people attack this area, where
Okay.
it's like there are leaps of faith hidden in there, right? In the scientists, in all this talk about falsifiability and Occam's razor, like there's ideological stuff in there.
Right, and
right?
and that's interesting because I think what I'm saying about falsifiability is sort of like that. It's like I'm not saying so.
Right.
I don't think there's any knockdown. Oh yes, this is I think there's this. Okay, what am I trying to say? It's like I think to me it's enough of an argument to say that look at sort of the past and the way things have gone, and theories that are falsifiable have seemed to have had the best push, towards progress.
Yeah.
Whereas theories that aren't falsifiable lead to just a bunch of circle jerking or whatever, like just bunch of hot air with not a lot of progress. And so, right. So, what kind of argument is that?
Yeah, I mean it's a very practical argument. Well, I mean what is the actual content then of the scientific method? You know what I mean? Like it's so
right.
like the real principle that the really core principle is just that you try to believe stuff that looks true, right? You know what I'm saying? So falsifiability and Occam's razor, these are just tools in our toolbox, right?
Right.
Everything is questionable. So maybe that's another way to attack. So somebody could say, okay, you're being very reasonable about falsifiability and whatnot, but what are you really left with? Like, do you even have a method here, like, for determining what's true? You know?
Yeah. So I don't think we do. I don't think we do in any like provable sense or anything like that. I guess I see these as just sort of, and this is I haven't formulated this very well, but let me just take a stab. Like all of these tools, like Occam's razor and falsifiability and the scientific method, these are all just like things that we bang on, right? Like they're just like we're like the cat, just like reaching our hand through the cage and like fumbling around, right? And over a long period of time, right, we get this sort of causal model, or I don't know, we get this sort of sense of, like, yeah, this works and this doesn't, and these things seem to be important, and we don't really understand exactly why. So I guess in that sense, I'm saying science is exposed to criticisms, or it's exposed to the idea, oh yeah, these fundamental things that you're buying into, you don't have justification for those independent of experience, or independent of just, hey, they seem to work.
Right.
Right. And so, I mean, I don't think that means that it's just faith.
Yeah, I agree.
But I do think it's very different than saying, oh yeah, these things are somehow justified, outside of experience. Logically justified, or
sure, yeah.
So, and I don't know what people think about that. Like, I get the sense sometimes that people think it's less messy than that, or whatever, or more, more organized.
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, that's kind of I keep going back to this. There's this idealized view that we're talking about, and then there's this messy world of actual scientists and philosophers and whatever else, and the things that they say, and it's hard to know. Whenever I hear religious people reacting negatively, it's like I always think, well, they might be reacting to people who are being more black and white in their thinking than I would be,
Right.
Like whatever, scientists and philosophers who do, I think, can come across as a bit arrogant, or so these are ways where I relate a little bit to maybe because of our upbringing,
Right.
Where it's like I do see how they can come across as arrogant or dismissive and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, a good example,
because all people are like that.
Right. Yeah.
But,
yeah. Some of this stuff, and this is probably another topic, but I think the psychology that shines through, whether you're a religious person or not, or a totally scientific person or anything, is interesting, because there's a lot more commonality than either side would want there to be.
Right.
Yeah. Right. But no. As a concrete example of that, are you thinking of something like the Smolian example you had mentioned?
Yeah, maybe.
What was that one again?
Yeah. So it was in a book called Who Knows, I believe, by Smolian, that I was just reading a few weeks ago. It's kind of a rambling book he wrote about religion and consciousness, and and he mentioned a biologist friend who just said that she thought it was impossible to survive bodily death. Like the idea was logically impossible.
Right. She couldn't even imagine.
Yeah.
Right. And so I could see someone.
Yeah. I mean, like that. I mean, it was more like it was logically. It was really like a logical thing. Like you are made out of molecules, and those molecules are going to disperse when you die, and so it's logically impossible. Whereas I would say, just totally as a mechanist, even, I would just say, well, no, but a thing outside of our universe could just copy the bits that were in your brain right before you died, right? That would,
Well, a lot of people,
And
maybe biologists included, aren't they don't have that view of identity as pattern, and so let's give
right,
this biologist a little bit and say that, well, maybe they believe that their identity is, you know, if you copied the atoms, if you duplicated it exactly, it still wouldn't be them. Now, I don't agree with it. I don't think that's even really
sure,
coherent. But
yeah, yeah, yeah,
let's say that that person believes
yeah,
it.
yeah, definitely people believe that.
Right. So I still would say, and in agreement with you, I would say, well, wait a minute. Who's to say that something couldn't take the exact same molecules and collect them from,
Right.
wherever they've gone to and put them together exactly how they were? Right.
Yeah.
So so
And
so
it's not even. Yeah.
right. I mean, who cares how unlikely it is or how hard it would be?
Right. Right.
'Cause
Or how unfalsifiable it is, because yeah, I mean, like you could imagine a thing if you really needed to keep those exact same molecules, you could imagine a thing pulling those molecules out and putting in replacement ones. So really, that person just died right there and became
right.
somebody else. But we wouldn't know it. We wouldn't have any way of knowing that. But it's still
Right.
conceivable, right? Yeah.
Right.
But then, like, I mean, this person, she's a hypothetical person, because she was apparently a real person that Smolian talked to, but still, we don't know, like.
Right.
We can only imagine what she would say to these things. Like maybe she would say, "Okay, you're right." Right? That's what you and I want to believe about all scientists, right?
Right. That she would say, "Well, okay, look, I was just being flippant. I was just
right.
I wasn't really using my imagination, and if you push me hard enough, of course, I'll admit that there's conceivable ways that life could go. Well, but let's make it interesting and say that
we know that there are people that would.
Right. So let's say, but so here's the difference, and okay, this is the point I want to make. The difference between what I want to believe is the difference between the religious viewpoint and scientific viewpoint is that individual people might go that far, and I think that they are. I think that when religious people react to those kind of people and say, oh, that's kind of a faith-like position. I actually think there's something there, and I'm willing to say that. But I think that science in general, like, corrects against those sort of things because it's an endeavor carried forth by so many people fighting against each other all over the world simultaneously and opposing. So I think and particularly because it's so adversarial and because we're always trying to show that what we think is wrong, that it's like opposite, or it's different from religious thought in exactly that way. So I don't think that and it's weird. It's exactly the opposite. Individual religious people, if you they'd say, oh, I would never believe that there's no God. It's impossible. It's inconceivable. And maybe if you push them hard enough, you might be able to get them to go, well, okay, yeah, I mean, there is evidence that could cause me not to believe in God. I don't, but religion as a whole is not like that.
Yeah.
Right. So there's this weird it's not just asymmetry. It's like opposite tendency or whatever flavor there. It's like. What was I going to say? So that's why I want to say. I mean, I don't know. It's obviously we're just trying to highlight things that we are convinced are like so different between religious and scientific ways of thinking, and that might be one way of thinking about one of them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not so interested in. I mean, you can always take these things up to the meta level, right? And question whether it's an ideal. Like, do we just have this ideology that the process as a whole is actually tracking truth? Because there are philosophers who just don't believe that, right?
Right.
I guess for the context of this discussion, I guess I'm just not that interested in. Like, I've thought about those arguments and whatnot, and don't find them very moving.
Well, we can just note,
So,
I think the thing to note then is just, yes, even given that, the point was that the issues at an individual level with individual scientists don't necessarily mean the same thing for science as a whole. There may be separate problems at a meta level with what's going on at the high level, but right, so so where are we?
Yeah, I mean I mean, I feel like I had more to say about falsification stuff, but it gets into it gets more abstract. I don't know if it's. I mean, stuff about like Hume's induction problem, which we've talked about, and things like.
Right.
It's related to falsifiability and Occam's razor and all these. There's like stuff like that. It feels like it breaks down when you push philosophy far enough, right?
Huh.
When you start act like, for instance, just talking about these regularities in nature that we believe that they're gonna keep happening because we've observed them happening in the past, right? And there's a potential circularity. I mean, that's the induction problem.
Right. Of course.
I'm a little bit skeptical. I don't really feel like we've solved that problem philosophically, and I think that it's my impression that most scientists think we have, essentially, or they don't even think it's an interesting problem, right?
Right. I mean, I think maybe that it hinges on the word philosophically there, because I think most scientists would say we've solved it practically.
Right.
And I think that's Popper's solution. I think is the total practical solution. It's like.
So yeah,
we don't know infallibly that these things are going to work at all. They could totally not work tomorrow. I mean, his whole if I'm reading it right, his idea is we've got these ideas and we haven't been able to shoot them down yet, and so that's the best we've got.
Right. And it's a bit subtle, but I feel like. Right, so we've got some ideas that we haven't been able to shoot down yet, but then you ask, why does that matter? Like, why are those ideas more interesting to us? And so I would argue that you actually have to already make the inductive assumption for those to matter, right? So I actually don't think that position addresses the induction problem.
Do you mean matter? You mean why you should why you should accept that above and beyond something else, or
yeah, I'm saying that without some pre-existing idea, that pre-existing inductive idea, the fact that we haven't been able to shoot down these theories, like some particular idea, even though we've done a lot of stringent falsification tests, right? And this particular idea hasn't been falsified, but what I'm saying is that can't tell us anything about the future, unless we already assume that the future is going to act something like it did in the past, right? Why do we think that these theories aren't just going to be falsified tomorrow at all, right? Like,
okay.
I think there's I think there's actually the assumption there that things are going to continue acting the way they have been. Otherwise, that theory really wouldn't be any better than some other theory that we haven't done any falsification tests on. Like, right? We're assuming that the fact that this stuff happened in the past, like we've attempted to falsify it and it's held up.
Right.
That tells us more about what's the future, right? That's the inductive. I'm not explaining myself very well.
Yeah, I think I get the direction that you're trying to go, and I don't know enough about. I actually don't know enough about what Popper would say. His stuff to know what his reaction would be.
Sure.
I might have some ideas, but yeah, I mean, I think we should probably
wrap it up.
Wrap it up there.
Right.
So we don't go on for 2 hours. And
yeah. Yeah. Those are. Yeah. The general gist there is that. there's always these meta levels, I guess, that
Right.
I'm always like pushing to take it up to a meta level, and I'm always asking this question of like, are we making leaps as scientists? Are we making leaps of faith that are actually like the leaps of faith that we claim religious people are making, you know, or that maybe they themselves claim they're making, but that they're okay to make, or something like that. And so I guess I always have these niggling worries that we are, but
right, because I mean, so at the lower level, it seems like some of the content of what we've been talking about here is that we don't think that's happening as in an important way. So you're talking now. You're saying it at some higher level, maybe those issues still bother you.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. But that's obviously that's a bigger topic, or maybe a smaller topic, as some people would think, that it's now you're off in la la land. It doesn't really matter.
Right. Now, I think it's a big topic. I think it could be interesting. Right. Right. But these things do get complicated. I mean.
Yeah.
Even with these couple just specific examples.
Yeah.
Right?
And I always wonder, to bring it back to the very beginning, I always wonder when I hear like Plantinga saying that kind of thing, if he isn't even partially talking about things like the induction problem and things like that, where so many scientists seem to just wave it away as like practically irrelevant, or like we know this already. Yeah, it's like essentially like, we know that the method is whatever we're even calling the method, you know, we know that it works over a span of time, you know, over hundreds of years. It's tracking truth, you know. You know, the result of questioning that, to me, isn't theism. It's just skepticism. It's thoroughgoing skepticism, right? So,
right, exactly.
I don't know.
I mean, that actually gets into some other stuff too, because I don't buy the tracking truth. I don't buy that science's function is tracking truth, but I'm.
Oh, is that a not? You don't like that way of putting it?
Not at all. No,
Oh,
I mean I'm more and more into, I don't know, like.
What's the? Okay, that's a. You just opened up a whole other discussion then.
We should have another discussion, because that's, I mean,
okay.
It actually relates probably.
You take some more pragmatist view.
Right.
Okay.
More and more, and it probably relates better, or maybe more strongly, to some of the other discussions we've talked about having, which things like your issues with consciousness, some of the like functionalism, consciousness.
Yep.
So maybe that's it's another one to tackle some other time.
Yeah.
And you know, my views on some of that stuff are somewhat in flux, but
sure. That's good, because then I can talk you out of them.
Right.
Cool. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's okay. That's a great place to end, with these huge questions.
Right.
That have complicated everything.
Yes. All right. Good. Well, that
awesome,
was
man. Okay. We're gonna do this again soon, everybody.
Absolutely.
So
all right.
Come back and listen.
Signing off for now.
Yeah.